I believe that my thoughts, some of which you may not agree with and must not indeed agree with, speak to the same God. I've written a paper which will be distributed. It's more disciplined than what I will present in an eclectic fashion. But I'm acutely aware that I've been asked to talk about problems bedeviling Africa. But before I say that, lest it be that it is only Africa that has problems, it is not true. As I speak, only yesterday in the United States of America, there is a state of emergency in the state of Texas. So there are problems in the United States. As I speak to you now, there is a war in Ukraine, so there are problems in Europe. As I speak to you now, there are tribal problems in Nagorno-Karabakh amongst the Azerbaijanis and Armenians. So there are problems in that part of the world. Because there is the tendency to assume in popular media that problems are only in Africa, completely untrue. And let, therefore, my presentation be understood in that context. We are speaking about Africa because we are in Africa and because we are focusing on the continent of Africa. When I came in, the devotion also said that there are diseases in Africa. True, but there are diseases everywhere. So let it be understood in that context. That said, and you being theologians of the Christian extraction, let it also be understood before I make my contribution that Christianity is a very young religion. It is a post-Christ religion. And I invite those who are present here to read the book that I love, written by Desmond Mpilo Tutu, God is Not a Christian. And I believe that God is not a Christian. Christianity, from my theology, is a human construct created after Christ was assumed into heaven. Controversial. That is the standpoint from which I come. I profess Christianity, but I read all holy books. I read the Hindu Gita, and I'm familiar with Hindu mythology. I read the Mahabharata. I hope all of you have read the Mahabharata. Because the writers of the Mahabharata say that he who has not and she who has not read the Mahabharata has read nothing. And I agree with him. The Hindu Mahabharata was written 5,000 years before Christianity and is 11 times longer than the Christian Bible. And when I talk about the Christian Bible, I mean the Bible that includes the 12 deuterocanonical books, sometimes referred to as the Apocrypha. And when I watch the Hindu Mahabharata, I begin to see theology, because the characters in that book attend a school under a tree, a banyan tree, and they are being taught theology. I urge you to read the Mahabharata. When I talk about theology, I'm also talking about theology before Christianity. And many of you will have read the works of Socrates, the works of Plato, the works of Aristotle, from whom St. Thomas Aquinas borrows very heavily. And that theology is also important because it is a theology that talked about gods, not God. That theology informed modern day Christian theology, and you are familiar with it as students of theology. When I talk about theology, I'm also talking about African theology. And those of you who are Africans will be familiar with the theology of Orunmila among the Yoruba peoples. Perhaps not documented, but that is also theology. Those of you, and many of you, are students of comparative religion. We must also be familiar with Islamic theology. So there is not one theology, there are theologies. And if one comes from that standpoint, one must therefore be very humble. I'm one who presently very slow to talk about denominations. Catholic Church, Anglican Church, SDA Church, Methodist Church. Today when you tell me I'm an Anglican, I resist it. Although I was baptized in that church. And that to me represents an enlightenment. I feel I'm becoming closer to God when I run away from organized denominations. Because organized denominations bottle God and confine him to a very small space to which he does not belong. And the danger of theology, therefore, is that in my Anglican church, sometimes I hear the priest saying, we are going to learn about Anglicanism. And I said, is that about God, that Anglicanism? We are going to learn about Roman Catholicism. Is that about God or Roman Catholicism? We are going to learn about SDA. Is that about God or SDAism? And many of us are caught in that whirlpool. Today, I dare say that one of the greatest problems that bedevils Africa is religion. It is one of the things that debilitates Africa. Africa now finds herself in a space where many believe, wrongly in my view, that all our problems will be solved through prayer and fasting. Wrong. The divine instruction, as I understand it, was go ye and subdue the earth, and by the sweat of thy brow thou shalt eat. There is no shortage in Kenya, even those of you who came from outside, who have seen many crusades in billboards in Nairobi, Kenya. And when you travel across Africa, there is no shortage of individuals going by different names. Prophet, prophetess. And yet those of you who are students of theology will be told that the age of prophethood ended, some say with John the Baptist, some say with Micah, but they are prophetess and prophets. There is no shortage of apostles running around Africa producing rabbits out of hats in the name of fake miracles. There is no shortage of them. That is part of the African problem, but we do not want to confront it, particularly you theologians. You do not want to confront it. There is now a theology in Africa of making people feel good without making them good. That is wrong theology. It is unbiblical and is dangerous to Africa. Because the Bible that I read does not say it. The Bible that I read is specific and unequivocal. When I read the book of 1 Kings, and I read the story of the prophet Elijah and his confrontation with Ahab and Jezebel, he says, bring forth the 400 prophets of Baal and the 450 prophets who are prophets of Asherah, and let them come to Mount Carmel, that we may know if God is God, let him be worshipped, and if Baal is God, let him be worshipped. No two ways. Choose. And a choice is made. That is the Bible that I read. And I don't think it has changed, even if you have the American or the NIV or the King James. That one has never changed. So there is no equivocation in the Bible. It's about choice. The other Bible that I read is to be found in Joshua 24, and you'll be familiar with it. The last meeting between Joshua and the elders of Israel before he passes on at Shechem says, remember, before we crossed, before I called Abraham and Nahor from his father Terah, they worshipped other gods. And he narrates what he did to them and how he came into the land of the Amorites. And he tells them, choose you now whether you want to worship the gods that your fathers worshipped before they crossed the Jordan, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. As for me and my house, I shall serve the Lord. No equivocation, clarity, choices being made. I read that. The Bible that I read also tells me in Matthew 24:24 that in the last day there'll be many Christs. They'll come, and they are coming now, many of them. They shall work wonders, and that they would even lead the very elect, but for divine intervention. That Bible I read, and I suspect you also read the same Bible. The Bible that I read in Paul's second letter to Timothy at 3 also tells me that in the last days there shall be a form of Christianity where people will be lovers of themselves, and they would cheat everybody just like Jannes and Jambres did to Moses in the desert. I read that Bible. I also read another Bible verse in the Bible, Romans 1:30, that people shall be lovers of themselves, and they will have committed all sins, and they manufacture new sins like LGBTQ. So nowadays I go to church and pastors are equivocating. My own church, I saw in England the clergy coming complete with a dog's collar, apologizing for people who are engaged in LGBTQ, saying that God loves them. Yes, he does, but God does not love sin. And the last time I checked, and the Bible has not been revised, one of the reasons why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed was because they engaged in those. So, when you ask me to talk about the role of theology and the problems bedeviling Africa, I'm situating my presentation in those biblical verses, which are clear and unequivocal. Africa and Africans, like all peoples, face numerous problems, and human beings face numerous problems. We seldom forget, but we must never forget that this continent and our people were enslaved.